Yeah, so I'm Michael Chin. This is an excerpt from Smoke City. Madeleine cradled my ankles in her armpits, my body bent in a crescent, legs long and oiled, feet bare, in the customs of Smoke City wrestling. I moaned the way she told me to backstage, a sound of pain that could easily be mistaken for a sex noise, because that's what the men had come to hear. I understood in that moment how wrestling might be sexy. The two of us wore booty shorts and sports bras, skin shining, athletic bodies pushing and pulling against one another. My left ankle slipped loose, my leg crashed to the mat. The hold hadn't hurt, but the fall did, a little. Madeleine crouched in a half crab, some semblance of a grappling transition, like I'd thought partially free, but she nonetheless still had me, all the while positioning my body to be more comfortable, less prone to actually getting hurt. Madeleine was a safe person. She'd been wrestling in Smoke City for 5 years and prided herself on knowing this variation on professional wrestling as well as anyone. We sold sex to the men who drove into Smoke City, a casino town, for card games and booze to see what other trouble they might get into over long weekends. I came to the territory on the premise of good paydays, no travel, little of the wear and tear that comes with full-impact wrestling matches. Other girls reassured me I could check my dignity at the door. It was a good place to cool my jets for a year or two, pad my bank account, add years to my career from giving my back a break from power bombs and spine busters in favor of sexy-looking holds. My first night in, I wasn't so sure. Yeah, so the narrator of this story, I actually wrote a series of stories that sort of feature this character. She goes nameless. I'm sort of playing around a lot with what that means, but I'm sort of trying to play with the idea of this sort of being representative of a wrestler's journey, and particularly a female wrestler's journey through an unusual business. But in any event, she's kind of grown over each of the stories I've written about her, and I've placed her in different promotions in different cities, different contexts. And so in this story, this is after she has been a professional wrestler for some time. And so it's kind of a fish out of water story, and placing this someone who's been, instead of a more serious kind of presentation of this business, into this more sex-infused, kind of more exploitative kind of environment. Yeah, so once I kind of came upon the idea to do this story, to put the narrator into this big situation, there had to be people around her, and in a wrestling story, naturally some of them were going to be other wrestlers. Madeleine just sort of felt like a natural character. I started, this is one story I drafted pretty linearly, at least in the first draft. And Madeleine was just her first opponent, and I was trying to think of someone who would be competent in this context, who could work safely, and would sort of know the ins and outs of what it meant to be in Smoke City and to work in this context. So that was kind of the natural extension of that, to have someone who had been a professional in this very specific setting, and who was a realist about it. And we see that first scene where they're actually having the match, and then we go on to other scenes where she's sort of explaining the ins and outs of Smoke City to the narrator. The character kind of grew organically from that. Yeah, so again, sort of an extension of the situation. So for Nico, he's sort of in a sense, I guess you could relate him to a pimp almost. And in this situation, he's the one who's kind of organizing this transactional thing when our narrator is going to get into the world of session wrestling. But I wanted to make sure that I wasn't writing a stereotypical pimp character, because I feel like A, it's sort of been done, but B, it just sort of wasn't as interesting to me. And I think that in looking at this, I think part of what appealed to me about the idea of writing about this world of session wrestling and selling sex within wrestling was how much of a business it would actually be, as opposed to really being this underground world of grimy characters, and ultimately just being characters who are trying to make ends meet. So Nico, being more someone who's concerned with numbers and safety and logistics, as opposed to sort of being someone who's trying to sell sex. That's kind of the the core of his character and everything follows from that. And for John, I was just sort of imagining what someone who would actually pay for this service would be like, or how they might behave in that situation when they haven't done it before, when they realize that they're not really sure what they're getting into or why they've chosen to do this. And I wanted to explore a little bit of the psyche of someone going into this situation. So that leads to the two of them actually having a conversation about all this before they get started with their match, such as it is. But then still getting to that core piece of, like, he still has paid for a service, he still doesn't want to go through this experience, so they do still have the match, as sort of awkward as it is, especially for the narrator. Yeah, I think that, to me, a big piece of characters that kind of really, as you said, step off the page, is that they're fully imagined, that they feel like real people. I think a lot of writing, especially my own writing, my own first drafts, it tends to be that the protagonist or narrator might be fully fleshed out, but the rest of the characters are just sort of there and kind of filling roles. And I think, to me, one of the most important pieces of making a story more immersive and ultimately more successful is to make sure that all of the characters feel as fully imagined as the main character. And so you're working in nuances and details, imagining what their life is like and the way they interact with things, even if it doesn't ultimately show up in the story itself. If I know those sorts of details and have that sort of sense of character, I can sort of just inherently write that into the character, even if the reader wouldn't explicitly know all of those details. So yeah, I think that's probably the biggest piece. Yeah, I was thinking about this question, and I think the character I'll cite is Arthur Roth from the short story Pop Art by Joe Hill. This is Joe Hill has become fairly famous in his own right. He's the son of Stephen King, and so that's sort of the piece of trivia that a lot of folks immediately associate with him. But he's become pretty successful in his own right. He writes a fair amount of horror himself, like his father does, but also some more literary fiction. And that story, Pop Art, is probably my favorite single short story. It's one that I teach most semesters at the university where I work. And that the character, it's very layered, but it's sort of a speculative, almost kind of fantasy, kind of magical realism situation where most of the story is very realistic. It's a story of teenage boys and kind of coming of age. But this particular character happens to be inflatable. He's made of sort of balloon material. And it's sort of that one unusual characteristic that goes into an otherwise fairly typical situation and sort of brings things to life. But the things that Hill does to that character, he really makes him sort of stand out and sort of even he's not able to speak very well because of his condition, so he writes most things. But so all of his dialogue system is captured in this italic sort of font that sticks out on the page. And he really feels, again, fully imagined, to go back to my favorite film, what I think helps characters step off the page in the first place. If you were to imagine what it would actually be like for a teenage boy to be inflatable and to have to hang out with other teenage boys who are figuring out their own masculinity and their own social hierarchy and all of that. I think it's really well realized and interesting and a deceptively emotional story for how silly it sort of seems on the surface. Becomes sort of a tearjerker by the end of it. So yes, I think Arthur Roth would be one of my favorite characters. The one thing I'll mention, I'm sure I have plenty of people I should be shouting out, but I'll make mention of Cowboy Jamboree Press. They are the publishers of my forthcoming novel. It'll be out scheduled for September 14th release, called My Grandfather's an Immigrant and So Is Yours. So please be on the lookout for the novel if you like what I've had to say, and I hope you enjoy that as well.